Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the 7Artisans 35mm f1.8. I'm pleased to announce the release of my Capture One and Lightroom presets, Metamorphic Portraits, The Sound of Silver, and Rangefinder. These are all available for purchase at my website. Go to kevindealphotography.com or check out a link in the description below. And now, on to today's episode. The 7Artisans AF35mm f1.8 is an autofocus lens for the Sony, Nikon, and L mount systems. Its aperture range is f1.8 to f16 and it features a D-clicked aperture ring. It has a front filter thread size of 62mm. It has a minimum focusing distance of 1.3 feet or 40 centimeters. It has an angle of view of 64 degrees. Its optical design is 11 elements and 8 groups, and it has 11 rounded aperture blades. It has an assignable customizable button on the side of the chassis. It has a built-in USB-C port for firmware updates. Its dimensions are 2.8 by 3.7 inches or 72 by 94 millimeters. It comes in at a weight of 0.9 pounds or 426 grams, and it comes in at a street price of $299 US dollars. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. For all of you who are back to Kevin Deal Photography, welcome back, and for all of you where this is your first time here at the beginning of every episode, ask for donations to BIG, which is an organization that helps intellectually disabled adults adapt to jobs in the real world. I also want to thank all of you who donate to my Super Thanks link. With those donations, I buy more gear, which I then review on this channel and hopefully help you all with your buying decisions. But to the subject of today's episode, so here I am holding the 7Artisans 35mm f1.8. This lens comes in Sony, Nikon, and Lumix L mount versions. I'll be testing the Lumix version in today's episode, but if you shoot Sony or Nikon, stick around, you might still pick something up from today's episode. Right away, I'm noticing that this lens actually feels better built than the much more expensive Lumix S35 f1.8. Now, don't get me wrong, I love that Lumix lens. In fact, I reviewed it not long ago. You can check that video out in the description below or in the card above my shoulder. If you followed this channel, you already know 35mm is my favorite focal length. I love it because it tells a story. It shows you who your subject is, where they are, what they were doing, who they were with. It's perfect for street photography, travel, landscapes, and storytelling portraits. It's also not overly distorted, which is something that starts to become more noticeable when you move into 28 and 24mm territory. I honestly believe everyone deserves to have a 35mm lens in their kit, but the native Lumix 35mm f1.8 costs about $700, which can be a tough pill to swallow for many shooters. That's hopefully where this 7Artisans comes in. They've delivered a lens that's less than half the price of the Lumix version, and on paper, it's packed with great features. You get a stepless aperture ring, a programmable button, a USB-C port for firmware updates, and a solid all-metal chassis that feels surprisingly robust in the hand. The focus and aperture rings are both smooth and well damped, giving the lens a more premium feel than its price might suggest. All of that sounds great, but as we all know, the real test of any lens is optical performance. So let's take the 7Artisans 35mm f1.8 out into the field, shoot some real-world scenarios, and see how it stacks up against the native Lumix 35mm f1.8.
Alright, so for a real world test, I'm actually gonna shoot some digitals for a model here in this alleyway. I really like shooting full body and 3/4 body shots on 35. I've been on that kick lately. Sometimes I do 35, 50, and then 85 for the headshots. Today I'm just gonna do 35 for the full body and the 3/4, and then I'll do 85 for the headshots. We'll see how much this lens distorts. Is it able to hold up on those 3/4 body shots? Yep, there you go, killing it. Give me that, yep. And get a little tighter. Give me some commercial shit. Get real paid. There you go.
I think these modeling digitals look fine. The autofocus kept up with the model as she moved around. All the shots are sharp. The 35mm focal length does not impart too much distortion. She looks anatomically correct. And I also use this opportunity to test out the continuity of character between the 35 1.8 and their 85mm 1.8 because it's the same line of lenses from 7Artisans. I reviewed the 85mm 1.8 on this channel, and as you can see right here, these shots look like they were shot with the same line of lenses, just one at 35 and one at 85. So I think it passes that test with flying colors.
Okay, so I know a lot of you are looking at 35mm for street photography, so I'm gonna actually use this 7Artisans 35mm 1.8. There's some sort of a festival going on here in downtown Austin on Congress Avenue. I also have the Lumix Native S 35mm f1.8. I'm gonna put these two head to head. I'll take some comparison shots so you can see if the Lumix is worth more than twice the price, or if this 7Artisans is a fantastic value at less than half the price. So, without further ado, let's shoot some street photography here in downtown Austin, which, by the way, I'm recording myself with the 7Artisans 35mm right now, so you can get a little bit more of an idea of how it does for a talking head segment for video.
So you saw how the 35 1.8 did on digitals, you saw how it did on street photography. Now let's see if it's actually ready for a professional portrait session. This is a model who worked with a Montreal-based agency. He needed some development for his portfolio, his book, and so check out the results of the 35 1.8 and tell me what you think about how it does on a professional portrait session. So I have two shots here, shot at 1.8. The shot on the left is the 7Artisans L35mm f1.8. The shot on the right is the Lumix S35mm f1.8. Let's zoom in on these shots. We're at 100%. I feel at 1.8, I feel like it's a little bit sharper, maybe, on the Lumix, but not by much. However, when you zoom in, man, look at all of that purple fringing on the Lumix. There is a little bit on the 7Artisans as well, but I like the one on the left a little bit better in terms of fringing. Maybe a tiny bit of an edge in sharpness and contrast on the Lumix, but remember, This is $700. This is $300. So let's look at one more example. This is stopped down as I zoom in to 100%. As I compare these, I would say maybe a little bit more punchiness for the one on the left, which is the 7Artisans, as you can see right here. The one on the right is the Lumix, but these are very close. The point being here is that there's not a huge difference in quality between these two lenses, but there is a pretty big difference in price. What it really boils down to is the feature set between these two lenses, but in terms of optical quality, I really don't see much of a difference. Where I feel like the 7Artisans wins out is obviously it has that stepless, smooth aperture ring. It has the more robust build quality. It has that customizable program button on the side. And those are pretty big wins for a lot of you, where I feel like the Lumix actually beats out the 7Artisans. It has that front filter thread size of 67 millimeters, which means that it matches the rest of the 1.8 Lumix lineup, which will make your gimbal swaps a little smoother because the size and weight is about the same. And I would say the biggest win for the Lumix is the minimum focusing distance is about half of that of the 7Artisans, which is 0.4 meters versus 0.24 meters. And for those of you who like to get up close to things, that may be the feature that tips you into the Lumix category. But remember, $700 versus $300. That's a pretty big difference. And if all you care about is optical quality, the 7Artisans is a pretty darn good value when you compare those two lenses. All right, so I've had quite a bit of time under my belt with this 7Artisans 35mm f1.8. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and everything else. Let's start with the cons. For whatever reason, the autofocus wasn't quite as consistent when I shot in AFS. It actually performed better in AFC, though I still had the occasional miss. I use this lens primarily on my Lumix S1R2, and to be fair, I'm still getting fully comfortable with the autofocus on that camera. So take what I just said with a grain of salt, but I'll put occasional misses in AFS under the cons. On smaller camera bodies like the Lumix S9, this lens can feel a bit front heavy. On my S1R2, however, it felt perfectly balanced and right at home. If portability is a priority for you, keep in mind that this lens's robust all-metal construction adds some noticeable weight. For some shooters, that's going to be a deal breaker. A minor gripe, the barrel smudges easily, so maybe avoid grabbing it straight after eating Five Guys burgers. Wash your hands first and you'll be fine. Another note, and this is purely subjective, the lens does exhibit onion ring bokeh. Personally, I couldn't care less, but I know from plenty of online debates that some photographers really dislike it. So consider yourself warned if that's something that bothers you. One design choice I wish were different because of my situation is the filter thread size. This lens uses a 62mm front filter, whereas all of my Lumix f1.8 lenses share a common 67mm thread. I love that consistency across Lumix's native primes. Same size, same weight, same filters. It makes swapping lenses on a gimbal simple and saves you from packing extra filters or step-up rings. With the 62mm on this 7Artisans lens, you'll need to bring a different filter or adapter if you mix brands. That said, I'll give 7Artisans credit, both the 35mm f1.8 and the 85mm f1.8 share the same front filter thread size of 62mm. So if you're building a 7Artisans only kit, that consistency actually works to your advantage. Mix brands and it's a con, go all in on the 7Artisans and it's a pro. My biggest gripe with this lens, though, is the minimum focusing distance. The Lumix S35mm f1.8 can focus at roughly half the distance of this 7Artisans lens. The 0.4 meter minimum focusing distance is acceptable, but once you've experienced the flexibility of getting twice as close, it's hard to go back. I often like to get in tight for more subject isolation, and when your lens can't quite get there, it's a little frustrating. Again, not a deal breaker, but something to note. That's really it for the cons. There aren't many, but it's my job to cover them so you can make an informed buying decision. Now let's shift gears to talk about the pros, which might just win you over. First off, this lens feels incredibly robust. It's immediately clear that it's built with stronger materials than the much more expensive Lumix 35mm f1.8. While it's not officially weather sealed, I actually got caught in a surprise downpour while shooting with the 7Artisans 85mm f1.8, and it came out just fine, even without a rubber gasket. The good news is that this new 35mm does feature a rubber gasket, which should give it a bit more protection from the elements. I didn't get to test it in the rain. Austin has been dry lately, but I bet you'll be just fine if it gets a little bit wet based off my experience with the 85mm. Just dry it off when you get inside and you're good to go. The clickless aperture ring is another major plus. Smooth aperture transitions are a huge win for videographers, and given that the Lumix system is known for being a true hybrid platform, it's great to see 7Artisans cater to that audience. The native Lumix 35mm f1.8 doesn't even have a dedicated aperture ring, though you can reassign the focus ring to control aperture via a firmware update, but it's not nearly as tactile or convenient, and you have to be in autofocus to pull that off. I'd also like to comment that the fact that there's no stabilization seems to not matter at all. I'm not good at handheld video, but as you can see right here, this footage I shot handheld is actually decently usable. Now imagine if you're better at handheld techniques than I am. And of course, on a gimbal, this lens is going to be amazing. It's a reminder that you shoot on a Lumix camera, and Lumix has the best in-body stabilization in the business, which makes the lack of lens stabilization not much of an issue at all. The customizable button on the side is also a thoughtful touch. You can assign it to a wide range of functions. Personally, I set mine to change the autofocus area, since sometimes switching AF modes on the fly gives me better results. It's a small feature, but it improves usability in the field. Staying on the subject of focus, the breathing on this lens is pretty manageable, which should be a big win for videographers. The USB-C port on the rear of the lens makes firmware updates easy and accessible, which I appreciate. I didn't need to update mine, but it's nice to know that you can, and even better that it uses a standard USB-C connection rather than something proprietary. Now, I mentioned autofocus earlier as a minor con, but to be fair, in continuous AF, it performed nearly flawlessly. My hit rate with this lens was about the same as the Lumix 35mm f1.8, which is impressive for something at this price point. So while AFS can occasionally falter, in practical use, I'd actually list autofocus performance as a pro. As for image quality, honestly, I'm blown away. I can barely tell the difference between this lens and the Lumix 35mm f1.8. My experience mirrors what happened when I compared the 7Artisans 85mm to the Lumix 85mm. The differences were negligible. In a blind test, I'd probably struggle to tell you which was which. Sure, you might spot the onion ring bouquet on the 7Artisans in specific instances, but in terms of sharpness, contrast, and flare control, they're almost indistinguishable. And that brings me to my final point, value. If this lens were plastic, lacked the aperture ring and a custom button, but still delivered the same image quality, I'd still say it's worth the $299 price tag. But the fact that it's built like a tank, offers tactile controls that videographers love, and maintains optical performance on par with a lens that costs more than twice as much, that's seriously impressive. 7Artisans is clearly developing a line of affordable, consistent, well-built lenses for L-mount shooters, and if they continue this trend, they're going to build a loyal following. For budget-conscious videographers and filmmakers who still care about quality, this is a fantastic option and a great sign of things to come. That does it for today's episode. Have you tried out the 7Artisans 35mm f1.8? What were your experiences like? Positive? Negative? Tell me about it in the comments below. Did you go with a different 35mm instead of this 35mm? Tell me about that in the comments below. And if you're a fan of this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.